this is Patrick Russell. I'm interviewing Patty Geistfeld for the first time. This interview is taking place on January the 31st, 2022 at 4 p.m. and Patty is in Wichita, Kansas. This interview is being conducted by the Making History Project. How are you doing today, Patty?
I am great, thank you.
All right, so thank you so much for agreeing to do an oral history interview with me today. Could you tell me when you were born?
I was born in 1954.
All right, and where were you born?
I was born actually at home, but the nearest town was Anana, Alabama.
All right, and can you tell me a little bit about your hometown? What's it like?
Well, I didn't grow up there, so I'm not real sure. I've visited since. It is a small town. I have a kind of an interesting story. I was given away at birth, not legally adopted, and they moved around quite a bit. So I mainly grew up in Jasper, Alabama, and that's where I graduated from high school. And it's a kind of a small town. It was a bedroom community for Birmingham, Alabama, and wasn't super small, but not very big either. And it was more of a rural lifestyle, so it wasn't a city type lifestyle.
What's Jasper known for?
Coal. It's a lot of strip mining, a lot of coal mining goes on in Jasper, Alabama, or right outside of town. And that, and being a bedroom community of Birmingham, Alabama, it's a lot of people that work in Birmingham live there.
Okay. And in your family, did you have any other siblings or other children growing up?
Well, not growing up. I was an only child growing up, but I later was contacted by my natural family, and I have half brothers and sisters. I have 6 half brothers and sisters. 4 that were older than me and 2 that were younger than me, and
okay.
I was a different dad, and so
Okay.
they're all halves.
And have you had the opportunity to connect with them now later in life?
Yes, I have, and I have actually met my biological dad as well. I stay in touch. Some have passed away. There's one sister that I stay somewhat in contact with, and have spent time visiting back and forth, and so it was a good experience, an interesting experience to have that kind of an event in my life. I have a very weird life, I guess. Very strange.
All right. And what did you like to do as a kid growing up? Did you have any hobbies or things that you liked to do?
Mostly just play outside. I read a lot. I was always an avid reader, and but outside, riding bicycles and doing things outside. I was never very good at sports. I am absolutely horrible at sports. I would have been good at dance, I think, had I had the opportunity, because as an adult, I've really enjoyed being involved in dance classes of different kinds, particularly clogging, which is kind of like tap. I did that for quite a number of years. And I also was in band. So music and dance music has always been a big part of my life.
All right. And where did you go to high school?
I went to high school at the last year. It was called Walker County High School, is where I graduated. The next year it became Walker High School. They took the county away. So it was right in Jasper, Alabama. And I did go to a junior college there for 1 semester, and then I transferred to the University of Alabama for a couple of years.
Okay. And then eventually you entered into the military, I believe the Navy, is that correct?
I did start with the Navy. I wasn't doing so very well at the University of Alabama. I had not really prepared for college and kind of got in over my head. So I was kind of sliding down a slope of not doing well with my grades. And so I was like, well, what do I do now? And I wanted to travel. I did always want to travel. I loved reading about other places, and kind of had aspired to be an international flight attendant, stewardess at the time. And to be international, you needed a 4-year college degree, and that seemed to be slipping out of my grasp. So I worked for a little while in a bank and kind of pondered what to do, and was sort of not making a lot of money. And I thought, if I went in the military, they would pay me well, they would let me travel, and so I could check off a couple of things off my checklist of what I wanted to do in life. And so I did. I did not originally talk to the Navy, though. That was not who I originally thought I would go with, but that's who I ended up going with. I went to talk to the Air Force originally that day. They were all in the same building. They were in the courthouse. And I had already taken the entrance exam, the ASVAB, and I don't know why, because I'd never worked on anything mechanical, but apparently I scored pretty well mechanically. And I think I'm kind of right-brained OCD, or left-brained OCD. And so the Air Force said, hey, we can make you a hydraulics mechanic. And my little southern small town mind thought, no, grease, engines, no. I had no idea that hydraulics mechanic was not the same as like a car engine. They said the word mechanic, and I sort of started tippy-toeing towards the door, like, I'll get back to you and let you know. So on my way out, I knew I did not want to do Army. I didn't think I was tough enough to do Army. I didn't think I could do that kind of thing. And the Navy's door was open. And I thought, let me ask them what they've got to offer. And so they told me they could get me into an administrative field. And I said, okay, let's go for it. And ended up that the recruiter turned out to be a very, very good friend and a very good mentor for a long time. He was, Ted Jones was his name, and he was awesome. And I did go in. I went in fairly quickly because I went on a waiting list, and they got me in within about, I think, a month of talking to them. So it went pretty quick that I left.
And what year did you graduate high school?
I graduated high school in 1972, and I went in the military in February of 1975. So in between was my time of trying the University of Alabama. I did enjoy being in the $1 Million Band. That was a lot of fun. But class-wise, having 300 people in a class and 2 tests, midterm and final, was just not something I knew how to deal with. So
okay, so then you enlisted in the Navy 1975, and you did basic training.
I did.
Where was that?
And kind of a funny story on getting there. At the time, the military was doing cutbacks, and so I actually got to ride an Amtrak train from Montgomery, Alabama to Orlando, Florida, and it was really fun. I enjoyed it. And I think I stayed up all night looking out the window at things. And so, but I did make it to Orlando. And when I arrived at Orlando, I was a little bit older. I was already 20, so I wasn't as young as some of the girls that were going in. But they looked at us and they said, okay, anybody that's between 5'4" and 5'6" stand on this side of the room. And you automatically think, oh heavens, what am I in for? But it turned out to be a good thing. Every 3 weeks, they would put together a drill company. And so I ended up being the right height to be in a drill company. And we got to do a lot more interesting things than the average boot camp company that went through.
What's a drill company consist of?
The drill company is the same size as the other companies, but we, instead of doing some of the less fun things, we would actually practice marching for the times that they would be doing other things. And we would put together a little routine, and then the 3 weeks before you graduate, you performed at graduations. And we went one time to a BFW event and performed, and it was just marching, doing a little routine marching. So I already had the marching background from marching band and was the right height, so it was really great, and had a great company commander as well, who really taught us a lot about leadership. She was not a person who spent a lot of time yelling at you. She treated you like she would put her leaders in place and then expect you to assume the leadership roles she had put you in.
That's interesting that it wanted everybody a certain size, so you were all
Right.
uniform.
Yep, we looked good across the. All of our little heads were about the same height as we marched across it in review, and so that made I guess it made it look much more uniform.
Okay. And how was basic training? You talked a little bit about your drill company, but
Right.
what were the other things that you did, and how did you do doing them?
Well, as I said, I had a great company commander. The first thing that she did was she had everybody write a resume when we got there, and then she picked her company leaders based on either your work experience and or your education. She actually used them like a person picking, someone to be in leadership. And she set us up and gave us a lot of responsibility and expected us to take those leadership roles right off, and it was pretty cool. I had a couple of aggravate. I ended up team leader because I had the college background, and the one that ended up at the top of our group, our company commander, our recruit company commander, had a 2-year college degree already, and so that was kind of how it fell out. But I had a couple of people in my team as team lead that were somewhat aggravating, but um, we dealt and got on through it. And it really, boot camp was not hard at that time. It wasn't real terribly physically demanding. We didn't do a lot of push ups and a lot of physical training. We marched a lot, and it was pretty pleasant when we first got to Orlando. It was pretty hot by the time we left in May. And but mostly we did a lot of classroom work. My favorite was not jumping off the high dive and coming back up because I don't like going down deep in water, but I made it. So, but it was mostly classroom stuff with the marching training that we did. So it wasn't. I wouldn't say it was real challenging at all, not for me, anyways. And I guess one thing that helped too was yeah, I mean, they played the little sort of mental games with you, but my company commander, or I mean, my recruiter, as I said, became a very dear friend and a mentor. He told me, he said, okay, he said, they're going to do some silly little things in boot camp. He said, just play along, say yes, sir, no, sir, and just follow along and do the silly things. He said, it's only 9 weeks long. He said, after 9 weeks, you will go to some school, some training. And he said, and then you will go to work just like people do in most every other job in life. He said, just play their games through boot camp. He said, they're just trying to get, the message across and get everybody kind of as working together as a team. And so that was most helpful. I could just sort of in the back of my mind, if they were doing silly things, say, okay, this too will pass here shortly.
And was boot camp segregated? It was all women?
There were men at Orlando, but the companies were not mixed and were not allowed to commingle any. At Chapel, I think you could kind of maybe talk to somebody, and at meals, if you happen to be sitting across from some of the men, you could talk to them. But for the most part, we didn't have the time to go spend time with them, and we weren't allowed to really um, commingle with them any.
Okay. And did you have any instructors that were men?
Some of the ones in the classes were none of our company commanders that would have come into our birthing space would have been men. But when we went to classes, when they taught, say, like basic seamanship skills or things along those lines, quite often those would have been male
All right.
sailors.
And so then you finished basic training, and then what did you do next?
You, okay, to backtrack just slightly, when I left for basic training, I thought I would like to have been a linguist. I wanted to be in what they call the CT field, was Cryptologic Technician. And a little quick story while I was in boot camp, about the second weekend, they called me over to the administration building. And that's very scary because you think to yourself, what have I done wrong? Or they're going to send me home, because there's no other reason they would call you over there. Well, apparently, they called and they sent me to it was called Naval Investigative Service at the time, which is now the famous NCIS. And they had me stand outside the door at attention. And I'm thinking to myself, oh, I'm in trouble. I'm in big, what have I done? I've never even gotten a speeding ticket. So he calls me in, and he seemed like he was 7 foot tall and 7 foot wide, and I know he wasn't. That's my imagination. He was dressed in a black suit, and he slapped his credentials on the desk and said, I'm agent, whatever. And by that time I was like, anything you want, I'll confess to anything. I did it. And what he wanted to know was, he wanted to know why I wanted to be a cryptologic technician. And I'm like, I don't know, I just thought it sounded interesting. And bottom short story long, he talked me out of it. I don't know if they needed radiomen, which is similar because they're both communications field. I don't know if they needed radiomen or if it was just something they put everybody through to see if you were brave enough to want to endure having a top secret clearance and working with top secret material. But he offered me radio, and I said, sure, fine, that sounds great. So I ended up being designated as a radioman, which is communications. And so when I left boot camp, I had, I think you have 30 days to take some leave and stuff. And so I was to report to San Diego, California at Recruit Training Center, San Diego, for boot camp, or for training as radioman. And at the time, that was a self-paced school. So you went through it as fast as you could kind of pass through the different modules. And I got there, I believe I got there around maybe the 1st of June. And I think it took me about 5 weeks to get through the training in San Diego.
Okay, so now you are in San Diego. You finish your we'll call it advanced training?
Yes.
All right. And then
yeah.
What happens next? What do you do next?
So they offer you some choices of orders, and most of the people that I knew, well, at that point you're mixed. You're both men and women, and a lot of the men went to ships. Most of the women went to overseas tours. One of my good friends went to Australia. And for the person who wanted to travel, I got Key West, Florida, which was cool. But I went right straight back to Florida, just a little further south. And I was there at the Naval Air Station on Boca Chica, and lived in Key West, but Boca Chica is just the next island north. And so I came out of what they call A school. I came out of there as at the time it was called Instant Petty Officer. So I got promoted to E4 the day I left boot camp. So I arrived in Key West as an E4. And I was there, I got there probably maybe the end of July, I think it was. And I was there until December. And my adopted mother in Alabama was not in very good health. And so I was having to go back and forth some to try, and she had getting hospitalized. And so I actually talked to the Navy, and they agreed to let me try for a what they call a swap. So there was somebody in Memphis, Tennessee that wanted to leave Memphis, and I found out why later. It was pretty bad place to be stationed at the time. But he wanted to leave there, so I did a no-cost swap with him. And so, because from Key West, it was about 22-hour drive home, or I had to fly. And from Memphis, I could drive it in about 5 or 6 hours. So it gave me a little bit better flexibility to go back and forth for the hospital because she was kind of bouncing in and out of the hospital. So I left there in January and went to Memphis, Tennessee, and was at the training center in Memphis, Tennessee, again as a radioman. And they were very short-staffed, and it was very busy because you handled all the communications, all the orders came and went by communications for both the national and the international students that were coming there for aviation training. So it was a really, really busy place, and they had cut back too much. So, but I learned a lot there, and I had a supervisor of my watch that was came from a submarine background, and he used to aggravate me, but he would, I found out later that was how they do it on a submarine. He would grill me at night on different things, and so it made it real easy when I eventually went up to test for E5. I knew the information because he had aggravated me with that information night after night. When we had a few minutes, he would ask me questions and make me tell him how to do things. So again, that worked well. It came out very, very
This
well.
is 1976.
It was in 1976.
Okay, and tell me a little bit about being a radio operator. What exactly, I mean, are you doing, and what type of communications?
In a shore station like Key West or Memphis, mainly what we would be doing would be, excuse me just a second, it would be a lot of typing on a teletype. We had teletype machines, and so we were sending and receiving messages via teletype machines. And so you would type out the messages that the admin folks would prepare these messages and bring them to you, and you had to type them out. So they cut little holes in tape and then run that tape through a machine for it to be transmitted. And at the time, it wasn't computers; it was transmitted through a high frequency transmission. And then a lot of copying messages on Xerox machines, and we had the old Purple Master at that time. So you'd get kind of by 2 o'clock in the morning, you'd be a little woozy from all the Purple Master fluid you've been inhaling. But it was mostly very administrative. People would come and pick up their traffic. They would bring what we called it traffic, message traffic, and so not really anything much to do with the actual radios themselves. We had electronics technicians that did anything, if anything went wrong with the equipment, or teletype repairmen if the teletypes broke. And so we didn't do much. The biggest challenge of anything equipment-wise was there were often thunderstorms in Memphis and the power would go out. We would have to go out and start this big generator out behind the building. We'd have to stand in the rain and the lightning starting a generator because we couldn't be out of message. We had to have constant message traffic coming and going because in case something happened and you got a message saying things were going awry in the world.
And these messages, are they from like base to base?
They would be from base to base, nothing from person to person. I mean, an officer or an admin person generated them, and they would be anything from weather, people's orders, general information that the Navy was sending back and forth. All of that's done by computers now. It would be the equivalent of what we would have been the email. We would have been what you would have gotten by email now. It would have just been anything in general that the Navy needed to communicate back and forth. So when people were coming for training there, you had to get their orders to know who was coming. So we would get stacks and stacks of these orders every night. Another one that was really kind of a nuisance was when the promotion lists came out for either officers or enlisted. We would get 70 pages of promotions or those kinds of things by message traffic. And so, and the people would bug you to death because they knew the list was on its way and they wanted to know if they were promoted, which is understandable. So, you've got 70 pages coming in and you've got to make 700 copies for everybody and its brother of 70 pages. And so it took a while to get it all processed through.
All right.
And at that time, were there any women on any of these ships in the Navy?
There were the only women that were on any ships in the Navy were just hospital ships. I think at the time is it the Mercy and there's another one. But anyway, there were a few on hospital ships, but there were none even on any kind of supply ships or any other types of Navy ships at all, combatant or non-combatant of any kind.
And did you help break that barrier?
I did, but I went to Cuba first. After I left Memphis, I got orders to Cuba, and they offered me Iceland, which sounded too cold, and they offered me Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, which sounded nice and tropical and warm, and so I took that. And it was only a 1-year tour. And when I had gotten married a while back, and when I left Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, I had asked the detailer who does our assignments if there was any way I could get back to the States because that had gone off the rails, and I wanted to get a divorce, and I couldn't do that if I was overseas. And women at the time did 2 overseas tours and 1 U.S. tour. That's what we called our sea duty. And so I fully expected that I would have to go to someplace, Puerto Rico, Iceland, Europe, someplace. And when I called him, because I had asked him back earlier in the year if there was any way I could get back stateside so I could execute that divorce and get it taken care of, he said, no. And I said, well, I didn't think so. But I said, just thought I'd ask. So I figured I'd have to do at least 1 more year somewhere overseas, if not more. And so when I called the detailer, he said, so how would you like sea duty? And I'm thinking to myself, okay, yes, where? And I said that. I said, well, where? Because the females called that sea duty when we were going overseas. And so he said, no, how would you like sea duty? We went back and forth about 4 or 5 times, repeating the same thing. And finally I thought, we're not communicating here. We're talking apples and oranges. I'm like, what are you talking about? And he goes, aboard a ship. And I went, I was so shocked. I never thought of myself as being someone who would do something trend-setting like that. And it sounded scary, but it sounded kind of intriguing too. So he told me, he said, here's the offer I will make you. He said, I need a 2nd-class radioman penciled in for the USS Vulcan. He said, this was like, I think I called him in June. My transfer date was September. He said, we fully expect that they will amend or change the law, and it'll be hooked onto the appropriations bill that'll be signed probably in the end of September or 1st of October. But he said, I need to have names scheduled already for that. And he said, I will give you orders to leave Cuba, and those orders will send you to Naval Area Communication Station Atlantic, Norfolk, NAVCAMS we called it, Norfolk. And he said, if something happens and the law falls through and doesn't get signed, the bill doesn't get signed, he said, Merry Christmas, you get Norfolk. He said, you wanted to come back stateside. He said, if the bill gets signed, you'll still get Norfolk, but the ship is home ported in Norfolk and you'll be attached to the USS Vulcan. He said, I need to park you someplace meanwhile. So he said, I'm going to send you to Morse Code School in Charleston, South Carolina. And he said, I will send you an orders modification once the bill is signed. And of course it did get signed, and I did get the orders modification to report to the USS Vulcan in the 1st of December. And so I was I believe I was the 3rd woman logged aboard. I think 2 others got there before me. And but I was in the first crew of 55 women that enlisted women. Well, I should say they were enlisted as well, but I think a couple of officers had already gotten there ahead of time, and maybe a couple of chief petty officers, females, had already gotten there on board like a week or 2 earlier. But I was in the first group that arrived that first day of 55 women. And it was an interesting ride and an interesting experience from there. So
What type of ship is the USS Vulcan?
Great question. The USS Vulcan is a repair ship. It's got a crew of about, I think 750 people it had aboard. And so it was a pretty good sized ship. It was an old ship. It had been built and commissioned during World War II. It still had teak decks, which it was the last Navy ship in commission besides the Constitution. It had wooden decks. And they went to different ports and repaired other ships or repaired them in port there in Norfolk. And they could repair pretty much anything. There was even a foundry aboard. There was machine shops. They could make parts for older ships that couldn't even be purchased anymore. And so I went aboard just as in general communications. I was in what they call the comm center, the radio shack. And so I was doing pretty much the same thing I was on shore, just with some shipboard equipment, a little bit different as far as having to set the equipment up and stuff, but pretty similar to what I had done on shore. And so the first time we went out training what they call off the vacates, which is the coast of Virginia. And it was not too long after we got on board. I believe it was like January. I'm gonna get a sip of the water. So anyway, we went training, and I did not know that drinking a lot of liquids was probably not an ideal thing to do, and I did, and I got seasick because we were in some pretty heavy chop, and we were kind of going around in circles training, so you're kind of bouncing different directions. And so I wasn't much assistance during the training exercise. I spent most of the time sitting by the porthole trying to keep from being ill. But I learned afterwards, eat, be sure and eat, and then don't drink a lot of liquids when you're going to be underway in a storm. So it worked for me anyways. Don't know if it works for everybody. And then in February, we left Norfolk and went to New Jersey, Earl, New Jersey, to work on a couple of ships up there. So we spent about a month up in New Jersey and came back. And they were looking for people to attend, because we were a repair ship. We had teletype repair, which is something that we work on with communications, but not repair. So they were looking for someone to go to teletype repair school. And so I said, sure, I would like to go. And so from April till, I think it took about 9 weeks or so, I spent there in Norfolk, but I was in teletype repair school learning to repair them. And when I came back, I was moved from the communications center to the R4 division, which was the repair division for teletypes, and spent the rest of my time on board as a teletype repairman. And not too long after I got back, we found out that the Vulcan had hardly been anywhere. They had not been on a med cruise in a long time because it was an old ship. And so when I got back, I found out that the powers that be in the Navy had decided to do a trial, and they were going to send the Vulcan to the Med on a Mediterranean cruise, which is 6 months. And so we were the first female mixed crew to do a Mediterranean cruise to repair ships over there. So we spent time in different ports in Spain and Italy, repairing ships that were deployed over there. So it was an interesting. So I got my travel. I got to travel to Europe finally.
Mm-hmm.
And, so it was a good experience there. And my husband came in December, and I got pregnant, so I did have to cross back across the Mediterranean pregnant, and that was a little. I got a little bit sick from that, and so that was not a lot of fun. And they kind of aggravated me with it because at the time the law said that you were supposed to be able to you weren't supposed to be get underway, especially if you were seeming independent, and we were. And so I got a little bit aggravated and a little bit hot-headed and said, fine, I'm just going to ask to get out when I get back. I had 1 more year left on my contract, and I could, at the time, you could get out for medical reasons if you were pregnant. So I just told them I wanted to get out. I should not have. I regretted it later. I wish I hadn't done it, but it did work out in the long run. And so they approved it all the way up through the chain of command that upon arrival in Norfolk, I could get out of the Navy. But the good thing is the code was medical. And when you get out on a medical code, you can come back in if the medical condition clears up. And of course, pregnancy, the medical condition clears up. So I was really angry at them at the time, mainly because coming back across, I was very sick, and we didn't have a doctor on board, and we weren't with any other ships. So if something had happened to me, it would have taken a helicopter and a medevac, and could have been a really ugly situation. And so I was not real happy with them over that. And I didn't understand why, because other women had left and gone back across. I was willing to meet them when they got to Norfolk. I just wanted to fly home and meet the ship when it came back to Norfolk. I didn't want to get out and didn't want to leave the Navy necessarily. Might have stayed active duty 20 years if that had not happened, but other things were in the mill, I guess, for me.
Mm-hmm.
And so I did get off the ship and processed out right that day.
And that was what year?
That was in 1980, March of 1980. And so I was off active duty and not even in reserves from until June. And we spent about a little over a year in Minnesota, and realized that it was in the era when jobs were not really great and interest rates were real high. And so after about a year, he decided that maybe going back in the Navy was a good thing. He had been a Seabee, and that was impossible after Vietnam to make any kind of rank. And so he had thought, getting out and going home to Minnesota would be good. Minnesota was a little too cold for this Southern girl, and jobs just weren't there. So he went to try and get back in, and they wouldn't let him back in as a CB because that was so overpopulated. And they offered him a different rank as an ocean systems technician, and took it. So we went back. He went back on active duty, and we went down to Orlando for him to process back in, then to Norfolk for his schooling. And then he was stationed in Northern California, a little town. There was a little bitty base called Ferndale, California. We lived in Eureka. And so I was still technically in the reserves, but had been not drilling because of our moving hither and yon over those few months, the end of that year. In 1982. So when we arrived in Eureka, California, I realized that there was no Navy Reserve there. The nearest Navy Reserve was about 6 hours away down a 2-lane road in Vallejo, California. And I was like, oh, good grief. It's very rainy up there, and it's very foggy. And there's lots of RVs traveling that road going 30 miles an hour looking at the big trees. So I was like, great, I don't really want to drive that drive every month to go down there. So being in communications, there was a actually 2 Coast Guard reserve entities in town. There was a Coast Guard station and a Coast Guard air station just a few miles up the road. So I went over and talked to him, and they said, yeah, you've got the right skills, we'll take you over. So they put into process my paperwork and got me released from the Navy Reserve, and I joined the Coast Guard Reserve there.
What year was that?
That was 1982, and it was 83, I think. Oh, you're gonna have to. I'll have to look that up for sure, but I believe it was 83 when they finally got the paperwork processed and I moved over. And I liked it a lot. It was a lot better than the Navy Reserve at the time. The Navy Reserve spent a lot of time sitting around not knowing what to really do, especially with someone in communications, because most of the Navy Reserve centers didn't have any communication centers. And you weren't necessarily near a Navy base. And even if you had been, at the time, the reserves were totally just segregated from the active duty. So the Coast Guard has always been a little bit more, treated their people a little bit more like, hey, you're a part-time employee. We got a job for you. And so as soon as they got my paperwork processed, they sent me up to my first drill was at the McKinleyville Air Station in McKinleyville, California, at the Coast Guard Air Station. They said, okay, come on up here. You're going to stand search and rescue communications watch. Okay. So you sat there the whole time listening for someone to call Mayday, Mayday. And it happened. It did happen a lot up there because the waters were rough. And we had helicopters, and so we would dispatch the helicopters if we heard Mayday. You had, tried to find out where they were and what was happening and that sort of thing. So it was kind of exciting. It was like, all right. And I did that for a few months, and then they needed a recruiter Coast Guard recruiter.
How often do you go in as a reservist to work?
As a reservist, you go in usually 2 days a month, and then 2 weeks sometime during the year. You do 2 weeks of active duty, and but that varies. There are some places within the Coast Guard Reserve that you do the 2 days counts as 4 drills, and there are some places in the Coast Guard Reserve that actually do Friday night as well. They do a 5th drill based on the units, like a planning drill. And so a little bit later on, they were asking for somebody to be a recruiter for Northern California, and I said, sure, fine. So I actually recruited for both active duty and reservists, not just reservists. And I was the only recruiter in that whole Northern California area. I worked out of the Sacramento office, but I worked from my home. And so I would get people lined up for the ASVAB, process their paperwork, get them hooked up with Sacramento and getting their physicals and stuff. And so I really drilled more. I drilled more. I didn't just do just a Saturday and Sunday. It was kind of good because I was in college, and so I could drill anytime I was not in class. I could meet with people and, do the process paperwork anytime on my schedule. So that worked very well. And then for my 2 weeks active duty, I would go to the recruiting office either in San Francisco or Sacramento and spend time with those guys learning, just brushing up on my skills of the paperwork and stuff. So I did that until I left California. And so my husband was transferred to Bermuda after that. And I went in active drilling reservist when we transferred to Bermuda. We thought it would be a 3-year tour for us there. And the Navy was shorthanded on communications people at the time there. And I asked, and the Coast Guard was like, sure, we'll pay you to drill there with the Navy because it would keep your skills up. But the Navy said no. And so I stayed in active drilling reservist during that time, which cost me some career-wise, was a little, it put me a little bit behind the power curve. Our 3-year tour in Bermuda ended up being 6 years. And I could have flown back to the States and did all of my drills at one time, but I was working in recreation as a manager, and so it was really difficult for me to get away for 30 days every year. And so I ended up just staying in active drilling. And it was kind of interesting by the time I made it back to the States, because we went to Bermuda in 1986 and came back in 1990. Technology had moved on. So I had to really kind of struggle there for a bit. I even thought about changing over to admin, yeoman is what it's called. And I asked, and they said, nope, we've got plenty of admin people. We don't have enough communications people. You're staying right where you are. So I just had to suck it up and learn the new computers and the new stuff that had changed since I had left it. And so I'm glad I did. I'm glad I stayed with it in the long run, but wasn't real keen on it when I first got back. And but what it cost me was, it took me a long time, if you keep in mind that I made E5 back as a radioman in the Navy before I got out in 1980. And so I didn't stay with the Navy Reserve long enough to go up for E6. I was just shy of having enough time to go up for E6. I didn't stay with drilling active with the Coast Guard Reserve. I was just shy of being able to take the E6 exam. And when you're in active drilling, you can't, it doesn't count for your time. So when I got back, then I couldn't really take the E6 exam because I was behind the power curve with my knowledge. So it took me a very long time to go from E5 to E6. And finally, I kind of got my skills together enough that I took the E6 exam and made first class. My drilling, when I got back to, when we came back stateside, we moved to Maryland. That I had a job there. I had gotten a job in recreation there in Maryland. And so when I first started drilling, I started drilling at the small boat station at St. Inigo's, Maryland, which was near my home, but they don't really have communications people there. So before very long, they sort of caught on to me, and they said, no, you're going to have to go to Baltimore, and you're going to have to drill at the comm center in Baltimore. And so I would drive up there usually once a month and drill with the unit there.
And what are you doing there when you say drilling?
Sitting there listening. Your small boat stations listen to each specific little area they're in, but when you're in Baltimore, you're at we had the antennas and the listening. We could hear the whole area, every small boat station's comms communications. So again, we're hearing pretty much the whole Chesapeake, Potomac, and Patuxent Rivers communications. And particularly if a small boat doesn't hear it, hopefully we're kind of like their backup, we would hear it. So if someone calls Mayday, we're the one that we would let the small boat station know, hey, somebody in your area is calling Mayday. Can you hear them? And if they couldn't hear them, we would get all the information and relay it to them. We would also do things like if somebody called the Coast Guard on the phone and said, my husband left last night on a boat, hasn't been seen since, don't know where he's at. We would start calling marinas to see if he'd had some mechanical problems, pulled into a marina. We'd put out a message to boaters to watch for a boat of that description, that kind of thing. We'd put out the weather. We did a couple of times a day. We'd broadcast the weather. If a boater called, we couldn't unless they had specific criteria, we couldn't send out somebody to rescue them. But we would put out a broadcast, a marine broadcast, and say, any other boaters in the area, can you assist this guy? Well, the commercial guys just waited for those, and they'd be like, one of the boating companies would be like, yes, we can help. Okay, we can't decide who gets to go help. That person can turn them down, but we couldn't turn them down. And so it was the way they made their livelihood. But if a boater was in the area and could, give them a tow or help them with some gas or something, they could do so. And so yeah, it was kind of fun because you knew that a lot was riding on it, and people's lives were at stake. So you really tried to be very careful and listen closely. It was kind of crazy days like Memorial Day or 4th of July when there's thousands and thousands of boaters on the water. Sometimes it was very difficult to hear if somebody was calling Mayday. So hopefully other boaters would hear it and relay it to you and say, hey, somebody's calling Mayday out there. And they did work together that way pretty well. But yeah, it was kind of cool, kind of neat to do. And my husband took a job overseas for a year. And so I would actually go up. When we came in, the active duty guys got to go home for a while, or if they knew we were coming, they got the day off. We basically just filled in for them. And so a lot of times I would try and go up like on a holiday and give them a hand or let them have a couple of hours off to go home for their families. So they didn't really care what days we did our drills. We would just tell them, okay, I'm coming this Saturday and Sunday, or I'm coming, how about I come up on the 4th of July? And they were like, yes, please, by all means, come on up. So I did that there. We stayed there until 1996 when my husband got a job at Stennis Space Center in Mississippi, which necessitated us moving to the Gulf Coast area. We moved to Slidell, Louisiana specifically. And so at first when I went there, they wanted me to go in this unit called Port Security Unit. And I looked it up, and they wore combat boots and fatigue, camis, and I'm like, wait, no, I walked past that Army office back there in 1975. I don't want to, my idea of roughing it's a Winnebago with hot and cold running water. And so I said, no, I don't think so. They said, well, we can put you in the electronic support unit. And I said, okay, that'll work. But that really was not the best move for me career-wise. Those were mostly civilians, and they really didn't want us doing anything or touching anything on the weekends because, and I get it. We didn't know how to do their job. And so we were there, but we really didn't have anything to do. So the Coast Guard had a proprietary computer system And while I was at that electronic support unit, they came out with, they adopted Microsoft Office and Microsoft products on their computers and got rid of their proprietary computers. So some younger people knew how to use it, but a lot of your people who'd either been in a number of years, or particularly a lot of the civilian employees that had been in a while and had only used that Coast Guard system, did not know how to operate Windows or Microsoft Office. So we got tasked with being a little tiger team that went around to different places and taught a class in it. So that was kind of fun. So I did that for a while, and I went to New Orleans and taught one, the air station in New Orleans, went over to Houston and taught a class, and then went to the port security unit, taught a class. And I thought, well, this is kind of fun. I could do this. Maybe that was in August of 2000. Or well, July was when the class was. So I called them and said, okay, do you guys still need somebody in those port security units? And they were like, yes, next month, be there. Like, okay. So they transferred me right away into that port security unit. And it did turn out to be a very good experience. Career-wise, I learned a lot for making Chief Petty Officer, E7. And then also just a lot of different skills. It challenged me in ways that I didn't know it would. And I met the challenge, so it kind of, it caused me to get out of my comfort zone. So that was a really good thing. And I found out I was tougher than I thought I was and stronger than I thought I was. So that turned out to be very good. And so keeping in mind the date, port security units are units that are designed to protect high value assets in ports, either on the shore around a port or by little small boats. We had 6 26-foot Boston whalers that had twin 250 horsepower engines on them, so they could really scoot. They had 50 cals mounted on the front, and the crew was armed, so we could protect things. So the units were designed really after the USS Cole was bombed in the port of Yemen, so that we could patrol around boats and keep that from ever happening again, or patrol around the shore of a port and keep somebody from attacking that way. So when I went in August of 2000, I never dreamed that in September of 2011, 9/11 would happen. And so, okay, yeah, I'll repeat that again.
Okay, so you were telling me about port security, and
Right.
you're just getting acquainted with that, and then something happens with 9/11.
Right. So the port security units are a deployable operations unit for the Coast Guard. Basically, they're the combat version of the Coast Guard. And I never dreamed when I went in 9/11. I knew I would have to go out and train with weapons and sleep in tents for training and stuff, but never dreamed something as big as 9/11 would happen. So a year and a month after I went in, I was at work at my civilian job one morning, and well, lo and behold, the planes flew into the Trade Center of the Pentagon and in the field in Pennsylvania. So I called my family and I said, okay, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when and where. We are gone somewhere, and it could be tonight. It could be as quick as that, because we were designed to be ready to go within 48 hours and take everything we need with us except for fuel and water. So we fully expected that we might get called up, because our sister units did. One was called to the Port of New York, one was called to Boston, some out in California were called up. We were scheduled to go for basically our training. Our 2 weeks of training was supposed to be at Camp Lejeune. 9/11 happened, I believe it was Tuesday, and Friday was when we were supposed to fly to Camp Lejeune for our combat training, for our combat skills training. And so we didn't know. We didn't know whether we were going to go there or whether we were going to be called somewhere. So all week they told us, don't leave the phone. stay close to a phone. So we didn't hear from them. So finally, about Wednesday, they called, or Thursday, I think it was, they called and they said, we're going to go ahead and send you guys to Camp Lejeune. It was the Marine Corps base at Camp Lejeune where we were going to do our training. We're going to send you there. We don't know whether you'll come home from there. You may proceed on to somewhere else. So we left with the knowledge that we might head on out somewhere else. The first week, we did all of our training. You do things like weapons training, you do land navigation, all of the things that any type of combat unit would do. Drills for our boats, and we do the gas training with the gas and stuff like that. So through the first week, they made sure all of our shots were up to date, and they did all of our paperwork and stuff. And so it looked like we were going somewhere, and we could tell though, by that weekend, it just sort of slowed down and stopped. And we were like, okay. So they had decided that they would send us back home, let us finish out the second week of training and send us back home, but that we would deploy in February or March of that upcoming year. We would replace a unit that had been sent to Bahrain. And so we knew when we went back home that we could get everything in order and that we were going to train or we were going to relieve the unit in Bahrain. So I thought that sounded pretty cool, kind of scary, but very cool. Meanwhile, in October, I took the test for E7, and that got sent off, and found out that I made E7 and was promoted in February, was sent up to the Chief Petty Officers Academy in New London, Connecticut for 2 weeks before deploying, and then got back home and was home a couple of weeks and left. In the 1st of March, I left for Bahrain. And so that was pretty interesting. They kind of scared us a lot. You know, I found that the military often has pretty inaccurate cultural information. They made it, for one thing, as a woman, you think, oh my gosh, the Middle East, I'm going to be treated just horribly. You know, they treat women really bad. And Bahrain is a very progressive area. A lot of expat British women live there, British people, a lot of, there is, of course, Muslims there, and they range all the way from very conservative on up, but they don't expect you to dress that way like they would, say, in Saudi Arabia. So we did not have to cover our head or wear anything, any of the that. The military expected us to dress conservatively. We had to always have sleeves and long pants on. We couldn't wear our uniforms out in town anyway. And so when I got there, in addition to communications, which there wasn't much to do with the communications group, mostly they were working on the boats and just got integrated into that side of things. So I found out that what I really was tasked with doing was logistics. So this is how my husband often put it. He said, the Navy gave you a credit card, because we were working with the Navy. We folded into the Harbor Defense Unit. He said, the Navy gave you a credit card and told you to go shopping every day. So he told everybody, don't feel sorry for her. She's living in an apartment and she's shopping every day. And Bahrain is a lot of fun to shop in, it really is. But I was responsible for paying the fuel bills at the marina, for paying the rent every month, for paying for our rental cars, and then going out and finding anything from stuff we needed to clean the boats, to ink pens, to cell phones, to you name it, computers. I even bought an ice machine while I was there. And shopping there is a little bit different. It's a different process. Paying bills is a different process. It's not a matter of putting a check in the mail. I had quite a bit of things to go to get through the comptroller, picking up the check, delivering the check, that kind of thing. It was a process, but I enjoyed it. It was a lot of fun. And so that was a good a good experience there, and did get a chance to experience the Muslim country, and it's a very interesting place, and got to meet some people and talk with them, and I really liked it.
You were deployed there for how long?
I was actually there 7 months. I ended up staying a month behind everybody else leaving. They left me and one other female chief there, just so there would not be one of us there. After everybody left, there was a lot of, because I was doing the logistics, there was a lot of little final bills to take care of. The apartment rent, the rental cars, all, had to be still closed out and finished up. And so I stayed behind to finish up all those billing process. So she and I traveled back. The deployment was for 6 months, but we stayed 7.
And there's obviously a naval base there.
There is a naval base there. It was a small one. You have to walk everywhere. You have to park off in the parking lot and then walk onto the actual base itself. There's no cars allowed. And one of the most interesting experiences was the fact that the Marines do drive Humvees around. So you never knew when you turned a corner if you might be staring down the barrel of a 50 caliber machine gun sitting around that corner. Or you'd be walking along and all of a sudden you'd hear something in the bushes and you'd look down and there'd be a Marine laying there with a rifle. So they were always around the base, and they would move around in different spots for security reasons. One of the coolest things I did while I was there, though, was because I had made Chief Petty Officer before I went, and we were working with and friends with other Chief Petty Officers from the Navy. I consider this just a huge, huge honor. When it gets to be around August, usually, they have promoted their E6s to E7, and they do a Chief Petty Officer's initiation. And we had not had time to do anything with the Coast Guard. The Coast Guard does something similar, although I don't think quite as challenging. And we were invited to participate. There were 3 of us that had made Chief Petty Officer, and we were invited to participate in the Chief Petty Officer's initiation with the Navy chiefs. And 2 of us, myself and the other female Chief Petty Officer, agreed to do it. And it was the worst thing I've ever done, and it was the best thing I've ever done. It was hard, and it was very challenging. And
in what way? What did you need to do?
Well, it was just it was really big. It was hard. They really teach you leadership by adversity. There were 55 of us, and all 55 of us were Type A personalities, because we were in the military and we were getting to be more senior enlisted. And so they would give you impossible tasks to complete, knowing you couldn't complete them, but just to see if you would kind of get at each other, or if you would kind of band together and do what you could, but work together as a team. And we did learn to do that. And so it was a really, and we had some classroom stuff and just, but we would get up at 4 o'clock in the morning, and it was usually midnight before we would get to bed. And there was, remember that physical training stuff I said I didn't do in boot camp? We had to, a lot of things that I didn't have to go through in boot camp, I had to do once I went through the Chief Petty Officer's initiation. But made some friendships that just will, last a lifetime.
How old were you when you did the initiation?
What was that?
How old were you when you did the initiation?
Gosh, I was like 46, I think it was, or 47. So yeah, I was again a good bit older than most of the Navy folks going through it. And they really didn't, I don't want to say they didn't care if you didn't accomplish the goal. They really cared if you were trying, and they cared if you were working together as a team, and if you were helping each other to do the best that you could do. They knew that, there was no way you were, but they would embarrass you, and they would yell at you if you didn't, if you stopped doing a sit-up. Myself and the other female chief, we knew they wouldn't call our names. They would just yell, "Coast Guard," and we're like, "Oh boy, what have we done now?" And we found out later, we didn't know. You do a ceremony at the end where you get your cap and stuff, and we did not know that everybody that kept coming through the receiving line kept telling us how awesome it was that we went through this. And we thought, okay, but all these other guys did too. Well, the Navy kind of expects it of their people, but they had actually put in the program that we went through it voluntarily, even though we didn't have to, and that we stuck with it through the whole thing. We also found out later that the senior chief who we worked with is the one that had said, when the idea was floated for us to do that, some of the other chief petty officers were like, I don't know, they don't have to, so they can quit, and it'll set a bad example for our folks who really kind of have to go through it, or expected to go through it, maybe is the best way to put it. And he said, oh no, you don't know those two. He said, they're too ornery to quit. He said, they won't quit. He said, I give you my word, those two will be there on the final day. And he was right, we were both too ornery to quit. Although there were mornings when I would get up at 4 o'clock in the morning and go, why am I doing this again? I could be sleeping until work time. So we would have to go before work and do stuff. We would have to go after work and do stuff. We would have to do stuff on the weekends. We had to do car washes, and we had to do all kinds of things that, we could have just been sitting by the pool reading a book. But it was a very good experience in terms of teaching me. It started with being in the port security unit to begin with, and then that really further enhanced the fact that I could take on a lot of more adversity than I thought. And so I was glad I did it.
And what year was that for you?
Let's see, that would have been in 2002. So we can calculate my age for sure, from 1954 to 2002. And but I was still, I did end up actually with a kind of a knee bothering me on the runs. And so, they knew, they just let you do the best you could and kind of walk.
And then did you get deployed at all to any of the events for Iraq?
Yes. When we came back, we got back home in November of 2002, and then in the spring of 2003, we found out that we were going to have to go to Kuwait to support the people that were going downrange into Iraq. The equipment came and went into the port of Ashwaba in Kuwait, and so they needed a relief unit for there. And we arrived there in August of 2003, and we stayed until March of 2004. And that one, we were actually in an Army base, and that one we didn't stay in nice apartments. We were in tents there on the port of Ashwaba. And I ended up again not doing much with communications, as there really wasn't a lot to do as long as the crypto stuff was being changed out by the boat crew. So I ended up in what would be the equivalent of the Navy of sort of like a quarterdeck, they would call it. They had a tent where somebody had to be on watch 24 hours a day. And the mail was in there, the U.S. mail that people received. And so we were there to protect it and to hand it out. But we also, when people needed vehicles to go to medical or to go places, we decided who got the vehicles. And basically we were just standing a watch there. People would come and go. If something broke in a tent, we were the ones they would come see to turn the work request into the Army, that kind of thing. So we were just in that sort of capacity there. We didn't have a lot. I don't want to say we weren't busy. There was something going on steady, but just all the time. We worked a rotating shift. And so I never did qualify for boat crew. It wasn't something I really wanted to do. I could have tried to do that, but I wasn't that interested in being on the boat crews.
You're talking about the small vessels that would protect the ports.
Right, right. Yeah.
All right. And so how long was that deployment to Kuwait?
It was, I think, a total of 7 months. We got there the 1st of August and we left the 1st of March.
And any interesting cultural experiences in Kuwait?
Not as many. I didn't get to go off base as much. Just the whole, I guess the port area where we were was kind of interesting. I mean, I went a few times as part of taking the vehicles maybe out to get them serviced or something. We were a lot more, there was a lot more security there. So when someone went, someone else had to go along that was armed with the driver. And we were also there when, let's see, one of the big guys was caught. I have my senior moment here. We were supposed to go over to one of the other bases that night and see Robin Williams. We were loading the buses and they said, Saddam Hussein has been captured. And they were like, nope, you're not leaving base. You're not going anywhere, because the people in Kuwait were ecstatic. They were thrilled, but they were afraid that, you know, in their enthusiasm and their celebration, traveling, it was about, I think, 15 miles to that other base. They were afraid that things could happen. So I missed seeing Robin Williams by by just a few minutes of getting on the bus. But we mostly stayed on the base. The most interesting part there, I think, was the base where we were had a building that had been basically like their Port Authority building. And it had been shot up during when Iraq invaded Kuwait. And people had been killed in that building. You could still see bullet holes in the walls. And I don't know if it was superstition, I'm not exactly sure why, but the Kuwaitis would never go back to that building. They basically abandoned it. And when the Navy set up a base there, they asked if they could use it. And then the Kuwaits were like, yeah, but we won't ever go in there. So we used that building, and we were in that area, which was one of the prime areas where Saddam had attacked Kuwait when he invaded. There had been a desalinization plant there that was in the process of being built that he had destroyed. So there was signs and evidence you could just really see of that invasion that were very apparent still. And that was kind of spooky a little bit creepy. Mm-hmm. But the port itself where we were was a challenge. I now qualify for the registry with the VA, although I have not had any discernible health issues that they are actually admitting to or owning up to. There was a burn pit. There were burn pits in Iraq and burn pits. We had a burn pit there. We know for sure that back a ways previous, there had been a chemical plant on that site, the same one that had the big problem in Bhopal, India at one time. It was gone. So we know there had been a chemical plant there. There was also 4 refineries, an ammonia plant, and a cement plant, all surrounding our camp. The air quality was always quite bad. They even tested us. They did one of the breathing tests on us to use as a baseline. And so I'm eligible to register for the burn pit, but I don't have any health issues. I have some health issues, and I believe that some of them could be linked to it, but nothing that they've admitted to yet. But our commanding officer has cancer. Several of the members that were there during that time have had some of the health issues that are known to have been caused by the burn pits. We know they were burning things frequently. They were grading things frequently. We know there was asbestos in there because they would not even let us get a piece of plywood out of there because of the asbestos contamination. And the prevailing winds came out of Iraq, and we were downwind from the burn pit. And so whatever was being stirred up or burned, we were clearly downwind from most of it. And the wind, it was quite windy there. So that was probably my biggest experience with being there in Port of Ashueba, was that exposure to those toxins, possible toxins.
And from that deployment, what did you do next?
So after we came back home, we got back home in 2004, and Katrina hit in 2005, and pretty much tore the Gulf Coast up, and it was deployed for 30 days in support of Katrina. They even got through to me on my home phone, which was surprising because I think that's the only phone call we got in about 3 months. So I had a safe that had classified material in it, and the building had blown down. The safe was still sitting there. So they were like, you need to come over here and make sure the safe is still secure, and we need to get it locked up somewhere. And when I got there, I ended up staying 30 days and doing a little bit of everything in terms of just trying to support the active duty unit that was there and logistical needs again.
And where did you go? New Orleans?
I was in Gulfport. Our unit was in Gulfport, and so I stayed on the Air National Guard base there in Gulfport, was where I was staying. And we ended up being, the Coast Guard station blew down in Gulfport. The building blew away. And most of their equipment and their uniforms, so we loaned them equipment, and we also, our guys that were activated helped them with search and rescue and body recovery. And then a lot of our guys also came and did things like helping senior citizens or people that were handicapped with like cutting trees down and getting blue roof tarps on. I ended up working with the logistics officer. There goes that logistics piece again. I was destined for that. But it was kind of funny because things were showing up there, and we wouldn't even know. It would just be, a truckload of water, or a fuel tank would show up. And because we didn't have good communications with Mobile, most of the time we didn't even know stuff was coming. It would just show up, and then we would have to kind of figure out what to do with it. And some of the biggest challenges were, they started real quickly to build a temporary camp down on the port for the Coast Guard station. And they kind of threw up some tents and stuff. But we needed, strangely enough, they needed things like porta potties, and then somebody to clean the porta potties, and they needed shower trailers and somebody to fill the shower trailers, and they needed a way to get some food and stuff. And we coordinated with FEMA for some stuff, and we also coordinated with the Navy base for some stuff. And when I went over to the Navy base, to the Emergency Operations Center, they have CBs there. It's a big CB base. And so we thought maybe we knew we could get the shower trailer, but we didn't know how we could get it filled and emptied. And so we went to the Navy base to ask them if they had any way to support that. And they sent a CB out to talk to us. And so this guy comes out of the back room, and he comes running up to me, and he gives me this big hug. And our logistics officer is standing there looking at me like, why is this strange guy hugging you? And he's like, how are you? And I'm like, Vinny, I'm great. How are you doing? He was one of the chiefs that I had been one of the chiefs in the initiation. And he said, what do you need? And I said, I need these shower trailers filled with water. Do you have any tanks you can send over with water every day? And he goes, it's done. For you, it's a done deal. And she's like, okay, you got this. If we need anything from the Navy, you're going to ask. So that was a pretty cool story. But we spent the month mainly just wrangling everything from porta potties to you name it. And because there was no communication. Our phones wouldn't work. Our computer lines had been cut, so we had no way of communicating by email or a website or anything. And we did all kinds of things like flat tires were a frequent occurrence, so we'd have to load up a load of tires and take them over to Mobile, because that was the closest place that had a tire store that was open that we could get tires fixed. So again, back in that logistics capacity. So that was kind of an interesting, and it was just the most shocking thing though to see after Katrina. You cannot describe the smells to anybody. There had been, down on that port area, there had been a load of frozen shrimp and a load of frozen chicken that was supposed to be shipped, I think, to Russia or someplace. All of that blew all over the place. That combined with just rotting things everywhere, it's just a smell you can't describe. And then to see it on TV or on a picture is just not the same as you turn, everywhere you turn, everything you recognize is gone. Street signs are gone, and you can't turn right at that gas station because the gas station isn't even there anymore. So just finding your way around, even when you knew the area, was a really big challenge. So that was an interesting experience.
Did the Coast Guard lose its ships?
We didn't lose any ships. They had two 82 footers there rather, and they took those out to sea. And the Coast Guard station with the small boats, they had the small boats out of the water, and they sat right down on the pier area, but nobody dreamed that there would be a storm surge like there was. They had a concrete block and brick building, and that storm surge, they don't know for sure there at the Gulfport area, but they believe it could have been as high as 30 feet high that rolled right in there. And so it just took that building out. I mean, it picked up big, huge floating casinos and moved them inland a couple of football fields or so, put them right up on the land. And so it took all of their small boats, and they thought they were secure up there, but it washed them all away. And there was a dolphin tank right there by the Coast Guard station that had a little, you could pay and go watch some dolphins perform some tricks. That tank, they know that tank was 30 feet high, and the storm surge overtopped that tank and washed those dolphins out to sea. So that's why they believe it was clearly in excess of 30 feet that came ashore there right near the Coast Guard station. They did find the dolphins later, by the way. The Coast Guard helped the trainers find their dolphins and got them back in.
Wow.
So, because they were not suited to be out there in the ocean by themselves. They were.
That's amazing that they found them.
Yes, they did. We took them out and drove around, and they used their whistle and called them, and they came. They were glad to see their trainers, I think, when they found them. They put them in somebody donated a huge, I think there were 2 or 3 of them. Some pool company donated some pools, and they put them inside a warehouse on the Navy base there, and put the dolphins in there. We went by and saw the dolphins in the tanks in there until they could. I think they sold them off to maybe someplace in Florida or something. They passed them on because that place was too damaged to hold them anymore.
Mm-hmm. All right, so that is your story with Katrina. So tell me, what happens next?
So being that the unit was a unit from the Gulf Coast area, from Gulfport, Mississippi, they actually left us out of the rotation for a bit because a lot of the unit members' homes or businesses or jobs were impacted by Katrina. So we didn't do anything in 2006. It wasn't until 2007 that we came back into the rotation again. And they weren't going to take the whole unit, only like 55 people or so. And I thought, well, I'm going to give another one of our communications unit members a chance to go. And besides, my employer was getting a little testy with all the deployments anyway. They didn't come right out and say it, but you could tell it was, they weren't real happy with it. So I chose one of the other guys to go, but we got down to 2 weeks before time to go and found out that he was on some medication that prevented him from being deployable. And the officer in charge of the communications unit looked at me and the first class petty officer and said, "So which one of you is going to take his place?" And the first class petty officer had just started a new job that he had trained for. And so I kind of looked around and realized I was last man standing, and didn't mind going anyway because, as previously noted, Guantanamo Bay had a real soft spot in my heart anyway. So I went back and told them at work that in 2 weeks I was going to be deploying to what we refer to as Gitmo. And they rolled their eyes and sighed, and I knew that things were not going to go well when I got back. But that's okay. I decided I'd go anyway. As it turns out, it was a good thing that someone a little bit more senior went. The guy that we had originally chosen was just an E5, a second class petty officer. There was a lot of interaction with intelligence briefings and things like that I ended up doing. So it was actually a little bit better that I went after all. So in May, right around Memorial Day time, I flew down to Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, and found out that I was going to have a lot of different roles, which was good because it kept me really busy. I think I was, and I've probably forgotten some, but I know I was the admin officer, the comms officer, the intelligence officer, the EEO representative, the training officer. I ended up doing a lot of things, which meant I was real busy all day, but that makes the time go by fast when you are. And I really enjoyed it. I got to do a lot of really neat things. And of course, back in Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. So I was quite happy being back on the Caribbean island. We had
Is this 2007?
What was that? It was 2007. Yes, it was in 2007. And I would be there from May until right around the 1st of December was when I flew back home. We were housed in little sort of portable, kind of like trailers. But there was a whole row of them, and we had a little unit that was really nice. We had our own little bedroom, bathroom, and opened out onto a patio. But in spite of being busy, I got the chance to do some fishing and some snorkeling, and really enjoyed the last visit. I knew it was going to be my last one because I was topped out for time and wasn't going to have the opportunity to take the E8 exam. So as it has a lot of significance to me in my life anyway, being there, I knew I was getting out. And there is a really great lighthouse there in Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. So I decided that I would have my retirement ceremony there at the lighthouse. And my husband was able to come down. And we got it all planned and ready to go. And it was a real significant day. There were some things planned behind the scenes that I was unaware of. I thought I had planned my whole thing complete with, I had what they call side boys, which pipes you ashore at your retirement. It's a kind of a sea service tradition of piping someone ashore from being on board ship. And I had chosen the one female Marine that was there. I had chosen a couple of Air Force people, some Army people, some Navy people, and some Coast Guard people. So I had a real mix of the group because that we were all serving together there anyways. The young lady from the Marine Corps did not get to make it, which I hated because she was really nice. She had to go out and do something along the fence line that day and didn't get to come. But so I had a good representation of the other services that were all serving there together at Guantanamo Bay.
And you said side boys?
Yes, they call them side boys. What they do is you walk out through them. They blow a bosun's whistle. It's a traditional thing, like when a senior officer or someone is retiring off a ship. It's a shipboard thing. They pipe you ashore. They pipe you aboard. Usually only if you're very important, like a higher ranking officer. But for your retirement, anyone can have that little part of the ceremony. They'll pipe you ashore. Basically, you're getting out, so you're getting piped ashore for your final time.
When you say pipe, is that the blowing of the whistle?
Blowing of the bosun's pipe, right? Okay. That is correct. And so I'm big on ceremony and tradition. So I'm like, bring out the whole enchilada. I'll take it all. I had the high school. They had a little, I think they were like an ROTC group, and so I gave them a donation, and they did the colors for me that day. But the most significant part was that I did not know they had planned it, but my commanding officer had it planned. There were Coast Guard ships that came and went in the harbor there quite frequently, almost daily. And they would drop off immigrants they had picked up out on the water and get them repatriated either back to their country or wherever they were going to end up. That was sort of a processing place there for them. And there were 2 in port that day. I knew it. I'd seen them down there. Well, my guys that I supervised worked up on a hill in a communications center. And so they could communicate with the Coast Guard cutters that were in port. And the commanding officer was on the stage with me, and our executive officer was standing back at the back of the audience, the seats where everybody was seated for my ceremony. And I saw him pick up his phone towards the end of the ceremony, and I didn't really think anything about it. Well, the Master Chief Petty Officer of our unit read this really emotional poem about standing down of the watch. And it's basically, you're standing down the watch, we've got this, kind of, you can leave now, you can hand off the watch. And so that would have made me cry in and of itself, because I'm an emotional sob anyways. And most of the audience is facing me, and they don't see what's happening. So as he starts to read that poem, they had cued those Coast Guard cutters to sail out past the Lighthouse, which happens to be right at the entrance to the bay. And they blew their whistle as they went out. So by that time, I'm just coming unraveled, and everybody's looking at me like, "Wow, okay." They didn't see or understand that he had coordinated that, which I just thought was really meaningful, because again, I am such an emotional person. So it was a great way to do the last deployment. While we were there, I probably got these kind of a little out of order, but I'll go ahead and back it up, cut it, and move it if you need it. What we did there while we were stationed there was we were responsible for patrolling the harbor, because the detainees were there, and a little bit outside of the harbor around by the place where they were being detained. And we wanted to be sure that no one came into the harbor for good or bad, in terms that shouldn't have been in there, in terms of trying to get to the detainees. And particularly, they would send some home from time to time. I don't believe any came in, not to my remembrance, but when they would send them home, it was a very choreographed process. And they would take them out usually at night, starting around maybe 9 o'clock at night or so, after most of the streets were pretty clear of anyone on the base, because the Navy does still have a presence there. There's still families and civilians and Navy people that work there that aren't affiliated with the detainees. So they would take them out at night. They would take them down to the ferry landing. In Guantanamo Bay, to get from one side to the other, you have to cross the bay in a ferry. The air station is on one side of the harbor, and the main part of the naval station is on the other. And so it was a very choreographed move. We would rehearse the day before, and we would know that at exactly 9:03 they should be at this checkpoint, or they should be at the ferry landing. And so in addition to patrolling the harbor on a day-to-day basis, when that was happening, we would make a sweep, make sure no one was out on the waters, because they would even have all the personal boats come in at that time, that maybe if Navy people that were stationed there had personal boats, they would have to get off the water. So also, while the ferry was making the crossing, it's about a 20-minute crossing from one side of the bay to the other. It's a pretty good sized bay. We would patrol alongside the ferry to make sure no one came up and tried to do anything.
And on the ferry is the detainee?
Right. I'm sorry, what was that, Patrick?
On the ferry is the detainee?
Right. That's how they would get them across to the plane that was flying back to wherever they were taking them to. And so we would protect them as they were making that transit across the bay. And that was the only people that were on the ferry at that time. They would stop any other base personnel from being on the ferry. It was just them, the people that were moving them, and they, at all times, they had a videographer that would video from the minute they left the detainee facility until they landed wherever they were and got turned over to wherever they were going.
These are these are the high value suspects in the war on terror from
exactly
Iraq, Afghanistan.
right,
etc.
Pakistan, any of those kinds of places. And I don't know where they went back to. We never knew that, didn't need to know that information. But wherever they have been taking them back to, I suppose it meant that it was usually back to their home country, however that was coordinated. So it was real highly coordinated between the State Department and their country. But we just had to make sure that, we certainly didn't want anything, as the U.S. military, we certainly didn't want anything to happen as they were being transported, because that would have been a really ugly situation that could have caused a lot of issues for the U.S. had anything happened to them. So it was all very carefully done. And that was one of our jobs there, was to get them back off the island onto a plane and flown out, in addition to just our day-to-day patrols that we did of the harbor. Now, I was not boat crew, as I think I said back earlier. So my job was very administrative. It was on the shore, just working all the other pieces of the puzzle, such as the intel briefings that I would attend. If there was anything that was of interest, I would pass it on to the commanding officer or whoever might need to know those kinds of things, and then all the other little administrative functions that I provided while I was there. And but as deployments go, all three of my deployments were really excellent. I have to say they were very interesting. And I have to admit, I did not get shot at. I mean, we were in locations where it could have happened. There could have been bombings when we were in the Middle East, those kinds of things. They happen. But I was in a relatively safe area most of the time. And it was something I would not wish I had never done. I'm really glad I did them. And of course, the last one being of the significance of my having been there and met my husband of 40 something years now. So that was really special. And it was nice that he got to come down for the retirement ceremony, which I talk about. And so what else can I tell you about Guantanamo Bay? It's the Navy's best kept secret, I can say that much.
How so? How's it the Navy's best kept secret?
It's like living in a small town. There's not much for crime. Everything's pretty close. There's nice beaches. There's nice snorkeling and swimming and fishing. It's pretty warm year round. It's got a big enough little place to shop for food and kind of like a little department store exchange, they call it. And so it's really got everything you could possibly need. It's a very low-key lifestyle, a very relaxing place to be. You don't have a lot of heavy, fast traffic. You don't have a fast-paced life. And I guess if you need that, if you need a lot of excitement and a lot of nightclubs or a lot of excitement, that's not there. But I don't need that in life. So I enjoy sort of the relaxing. It was if I wanted to go out at midnight and ride my bicycle, I was, for the most part, perfectly safe. I mean, not to say there isn't military members that could do something, but for the most part, it was, something I couldn't do in most towns in the U.S. these days of go out and just take a walk if I wanted to, or ride a bike, or wander wherever I wanted to by myself. So I really liked it there. I liked it every time I was there.
How many people from the Coast Guard were at that base approximately?
We had 55 of our unit members, I believe. It was just over 50, 53, 55, somewhere in there. Now, the Coast Guard does have a presence that stays there all the time over on the air station side, because there are helicopters or Coast Guard aviation fixed-wing aircraft that fly in and out of there. They have to bring, from time to time, they may have to fly in parts or some particular things for the cutters that come in and out of there. So they maintain a little small presence of maybe 5 or 6 people, I think, over on the air station side, so that they can coordinate those Coast Guard flights out of Miami that might come back and forth down there.
And how big is the base for the rest of the personnel?
Oh gosh, what is there now? It's about 45 square miles. And if you go from one beach to the other, all the way as far as you could go, it's probably maybe 14, 15 miles, something like that, to go from one end. Not really an end, you'd have to curl around, but to curl around from beach to beach. the people that are there, that are stationarily there, are not allowed to go off the base into Cuba yet at this point, and have not been since the 60s when Castro took over. You can, by appointment, I think it's like maybe the first of the month, you can go out and tour the main gate. And they'll do a little tour where they tell you about the history of Castro taking over and the water pipe being cut, and just show you around. Now, I did get one neat opportunity while I was there too that only happens once a year. The Marine Corps has a ball, and they raise money by doing what they call a fence line run. It's on our side, on the inside, and you can start at the gate and you end up down at a beach. It's a 5K run. It's real hilly, and but it's so neat. As you come over that last hill, you're coming right down. It starts real early in the morning, 6 o'clock or 7 or so. I mean, it was dark when we got out there. But as you come down that last hill, you're coming right down towards the beach, and it's just such a beautiful view. And it was kind of neat to get to run along the fence line, because that's some place that no one but the Marines usually get to hang out, is along that fence line area. Wasn't in as good a shape as I could have been. Thought I was going to die coming over the hills. But I did ask the guy at the first water station how far I had come, and he said, I'm halfway. So I surprised myself. I didn't think I was even that far. So I made it the rest of the way. But there's golfing there. There's all kinds of recreation. You rent a boat, go out and fish for all kinds of fish. So it's a great place to be.
The fence line, is that manned, like with watchtowers, and you have the Cuban soldiers on the other side, or how does that work?
There are Cuban soldiers on the other side. We have Marines on our side. There's not a lot of problems anymore. As a matter of fact, the base commander at the air station, at the naval station, meets with the Cuban. There's an army base not too far outside the gate that they meet once a month and kind of go over things, make sure everybody's still happy, and shake hands and I think they have breakfast together. I'm not sure. At one time, there were Cuban workers that still came in the first time I was down there, and they went back and forth through the gate. Now there's no one that's working there anymore that comes from Cuba. There are a few people that live on the base that were Cubans that worked there their whole life, and they got the option at retirement to fold up their tent out on the other side and move on to the base, or go and never come back. And there is a number that did, that are in one of the housing areas. And there is still some mines out there. When I was there the first time, it was mined on both sides of both the American side and the Cuban side. And they did take them during Clinton's time in presidency. They did remove all the landmines on our side. At least they believe they got them all. But there is still some on the other side, and they're old now and they're unstable. And if you get a tour of the gate, sometimes you'll see a rabbit or a small deer that'll trigger one of them, and it'll go boom. It happens, but there's no one on their side that's really trying to come across there anymore. I don't think. Not really any danger. I think we're pretty much at it went from a lot of tension and the possibility that something could really happen back in the 60s and 70s to on into the 80s and 90s, when really they just didn't care. They had their own problems. It was like they were certainly no threat to us. That was like, you're there, we're here, we don't care. They had a lot more other issues to focus on with their economy and stuff than being a threat to us. There is a story they tell that's kind of interesting about the flags, and when it all happened, they'll give you on the tour. They were harassing each other back and forth, us and them, back when it first happened. And we would raise our flag, and they would put their flag up a little higher, and we would get our flag up a little higher, and they get their flag a little higher. And finally they gave up and they moved their flagpole up on a hill so we couldn't get ours any higher. And they would, at one point, the Marines do have a barracks out there, and they would shine lights in the windows all night, and they would throw rocks. And so we just built a kind of a big sort of thing that blocked the lights and they couldn't throw rocks across. But that all ended years and years ago. That they really wanted to do that kind of harassment. They wanted us to leave there back when Castro took over, but we had a lease that said we could stay as long as we paid rent, and he couldn't renege on that. We sent him rent every month, and I don't know if it's true, but the story says that he never cashed the checks, but we continued to pay him. I don't know if that's true or if that's just folklore, but either way, we got to stay, and they're still there. Think maybe someday they'll open the gates, who knows, and people will get to go back and forth through the gates again. So that's something that hopefully will happen, and as their government changes over time.
Any interesting stories involving the detainees at all?
Yes, actually there is. We got to tour the minimum and medium security facility after we'd been there a few weeks, and we had to cover our name tags with masking tape so they wouldn't know who we were. And they thought we were a new guard group coming in. They don't know. And apparently they write letters and send intel back via letters on us all the time. And it isn't that we really know or care. We know they're doing that. It's no big deal. So they said, yeah, by tonight they'll be writing letters that, 50 new guards have shown up for, because we wear the same uniforms the Navy did. So they really couldn't tell any difference. And most of the guards that were guarding the detainees were young Navy guys. And so they went by a number rather than their name. They were very careful not to call each other by name because of the possibility that maybe if some terrorist group knew their family's name, they could track them down. So they were real careful about their identities. And in my opinion, I don't know if things happened that were not nice. We were not privy to anything. If it did, I do not have any knowledge of that. But I know that they were very well taken care of in the areas that we saw and from the guards that I knew. They were allowed a prayer mat, and they were allowed their prayer times. They were given a Quran. The guards could not touch their prayer mats or their Qurans at any time. They were very respectful of their religion. And the food that they had out there was much better than our food. We could eat out at their dining facility. Theirs was run by the Army. And so when we would get the opportunity, we would go out there and eat because they had a great baker who baked fresh bread every day. They got to ask for what they wanted. I mean, not a la carte, like just ask, but they could choose, oh, I want a hamburger or I want a main course meal, whatever that might be for the day. And all of their dietary issues were respected and taken care of in terms of, no pork, and if they were vegetarian, that sort of thing. So they were also provided with medical and dental care. And they didn't always treat the guards very nice, the young guards. It was a very tough assignment for them. And the Army and the Navy and all the joint task force that was there tried to be sure that they were taken care of all the time in terms of their mental health issues that they might get from it, because they were harassed quite a bit by the detainees, and so we watched out for them to make sure that because these guys are 18, 19, 20, maybe 21 years old. It was the junior personnel, and they weren't used to being talked to and harassed like that by people. So it day in and day out, it kind of got to them. So we watched out for them as much as we could. Our Coast Guard guys, didn't encounter the detainees almost never, if ever, because we were on the boat. We were basically segregated from them in terms of ever having any direct day-to-day contact. We'd see them if we went out to eat or something, because they might be out playing soccer. They got to do that kind of thing. And they got classes in school type things if they wanted. They had Arabic translators that could teach them math or reading, any of those kinds of things that they were interested in doing. Games they could play, soccer field and stuff. So I don't believe that the majority of the detainees were ever mistreated that I witnessed it all. And so it wasn't, but it was interesting. There were some trials that were supposed to be held, but the one that I think there was one while we were there that was supposed to be held, but it got postponed for whatever legal reason, and pushed off. I don't know if it ever happened after we left. There was a lot of International Red Cross and amnesty groups, that kind of thing, that came in and out to visit, to make sure that to check the places where they were being kept, to make sure that there was no violation of any Geneva Convention or breaking of any rules that would mistreat them in any way. And never heard that they found anything that was a problem. And
okay, so that's Guantanamo. And so you concluded Guantanamo with your ceremony, your retirement ceremony, with your husband there.
I did.
And then you flew out. And where did you go?
Well, I flew out ahead of the unit. They left about a week, maybe 2 weeks later. We usually send out our equipment ahead of time because another unit has come in and brought their equipment and getting it all unpacked. And so we get ours out of the way. So we had a Coast Guard plane that flew down and loaded up our equipment on pallets. And so my husband and I, he's retired military, so he could fly on a government plane with no problem. So we flew back with the cargo from our unit and landed back in Gulfport, Mississippi. And so that really was kind of the conclusion to my 31 years of service. And wouldn't go back and not, if given the choice, I would certainly not go back and choose not to do it. It was good to me. It provided me with my college education and some real interesting civilian career choices, and good job, good pay. It was everything I needed in terms of getting a structure to my life and getting a kind of a jump start out of a real small town from Alabama, and growing up kind of a poor kid there. So, you know, if anybody ever wants to find an opportunity to make a difference, and maybe you can't afford to go to school, or maybe you don't have any good options available to you, that's always an option that will take you very far in life. If you work within the system to get advanced and to get the training that you need, the military is an awesome opportunity for any young person. And, you know, if you've got college in your career and you're going to be a lawyer or a doctor or something, and you can afford get scholarships or afford to pay for it, that's one thing. But the military has so many advantages that will help take care of you in life if you don't have that, you know, come from that background where you can get those things. And so I would do it again if I could go back to the me back in February of 1975. Knowing what I know now, I'd be like, yes, sign me up. Now, I would do things a little better. I didn't know what I didn't know then. I would have been a little bit more proactive at getting mentors. And I think that is something they do now. They work more with young people to get them mentors. So I would have been a little more proactive with getting a mentor and taking advantage of more challenging training and assignments than I did. I didn't do badly, but I could have done even better if I had really understood how to get out there and take advantage of those opportunities that were there. I came from a background where, you know, I went to work and I came home and I did what they told me, but I know now that I could have said, but wait a minute, how about if I do this too? And they would have said yes, and I could have gotten even further than I did in my career. So it's there if someone wants to take advantage of it.
And how long in total was your military service?
It was 31 years and I think maybe 3 months, maybe like 31 years, just over 31 years. And because I didn't get the chance to take the E8 exam, I could have stayed a little bit longer if I had made E8, but I didn't get the chance to take that exam because of some timing. which partly was my own fault. I could have stayed a little bit longer and would have stayed a little bit longer. I tell the joke, kind of a funny joke, that they kicked me out. They told me to go home because I had topped out in my time as an E7, and I told them, but I don't want to go, and they said go home anyway. So, but I would have stayed, and I would have stayed in the port security unit I would have probably stayed until 40 years if I could have, if I'd have been left alone and could have stayed.
And how was the transition to civilian life?
Well, it wasn't difficult because I was a reservist at the time, and so I already had a civilian job. Although, as I said, with that deployment to Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, when I got back home, they had turned over what I was doing they had contracted it out to the government printing office, and they pretty much told me, well, you can stick around. We realize we can't get rid of you, but you're going to have to find something to do because we don't have your job available anymore. We know we can't fire you because of the Soldiers and Sailors Relief Act, but it would have only been a matter of time. And I had already been hunting jobs aggressively while I was on the last deployment. And so I got into civil service not too long after that and moved on. But I knew they were tired of the deployments, and I guess I can't fault them too much, but on the other hand, it was kind of funny. The first one, they were like, yay, all patriotic, and we're so proud of you. The second one, they were like, okay, yay. And by the third one, they were like, really? You're going again? So they were over it, and I guess that's okay for them to do that. But so I didn't have a tough time. Now, each of the deployments, that was kind of interesting. It's okay, I'm going to tell it from this may sound a little sexist, but being a woman, when you're at home, you have to clean the house and you have to cook and you have to, do all the things that are not, and my husband helps. I will give him that. But, when I was on deployment, I had to go to work. I had to come back to wherever I was, my sleeping space, and I could work out. I could read. I could do something on the computer. I really had, my space that you lived in was very small, very modest, and so keeping it clean was very easy. I really had none of those things that you have to do, go to work and clean your house and buy groceries and cook. I remember after the first deployment to Bahrain, I came back right before Thanksgiving, and I hadn't cooked in 6 months. Not really. I might have, microwaved something. And so it was like right before Thanksgiving, and I was like, I have to remember what do I all need? Let's see, I need, and how do I had to just kind of get back in the groove of cooking things. So after each deployment, and I think this is true of most everybody, whether you were in combat or not, and being in combat probably makes it even more intense, you have to uncouple and deprogram from that 24/7 military life back into civilian life, and then back into it when you go back on the next deployment and back into civilian life. So there is a little bit of time when you're just sort of disconnected from reality, and it's kind of like if you were running on a treadmill and the treadmill paused and you were still running, you have to kind of get your footing again back in the civilian world after each deployment. Not that it was bad, it was just a change of pace and a change of lifestyle. And you're driving, which you might not have done, or if you were, you maybe were driving in different kind of areas and cultures and didn't drive much at all. So you're back to driving, and you're back in your car and back just in all of your, and getting back to, it wasn't a difficult transition for me and my husband because he had been military and we had spent time with him being gone and me and us being apart. So, but there is always that transition that you have to go back through of getting back together and figuring out who does what and how it's going to be done at that point.
And you said you finished with civil service. What was that?
I did. I started with the Army Corps of Engineers in New Orleans as a graphics artist, visual information specialist. By that time, that's what I had trained and gotten pretty good at. And so I did that for them from 2000. I started with them in 2008 until I moved up to Kansas in 2015. And I couldn't find a visual information specialist job here in the state of Kansas. So I've been interviewing for all kinds of different positions, and the Army, the U.S. Army Garrison Fort Riley, had interviewed with them as a public affairs specialist, and I'd never been a public affairs specialist, but I started out as the editor for the newspaper because I had done technical writing back in the past, so I was able to do that. And then also there was some layout and design of the paper itself involved, and so clearly I had that side of it. And so I had never edited for newspaper. It was different than technical writing, so I had to kind of learn the newspaper style as I went. And fortunately, again, I was able to kind of be a quick study and figure it out as I went along. And after I had done that for a while, I asked if I could kind of begin to learn more on the public affairs side of things, and was taking some online training through DINFOS at the same time, which is the information, I forget what that stands for, but it's the school all public affairs specialists go through. And they had an opportunity for me to start designing a website, which I'd never designed a website before. But everybody in the Army was pretty much new to it because this particular platform they had purchased, they wanted all the garrisons to have a real similar look to it. So everybody was new to it. So we all learned together how to design this website. And I did the website for Fort Riley and some social media, and didn't do too much video, but I did pictures and writing and all the other public affairs type things. And I think I maybe videoed a couple of little clips on the iPhone, but we had some other guys that had come from a videography background and they were much better at that. And so they just kind of grabbed those assignments when they came in, and I did the other stuff. So as of December 31st of 2000 and let's see, this is 2021. I forgot what year we were in. As of December 31st, I retired from there. I loved the job and I loved the people up there, but it was 130 miles away from where I had bought my home in Wichita, Kansas. So I decided that traveling back and forth up there, I was getting old enough, and I just was going to give it up. And do miss them and hated to let it go, but I'm moving on. I'm substitute teaching now for some schools in Wichita. So that's my next. And somebody said, you just can't stop, can you? And I'm like, nope, not gonna. But I've done a few days so far, and I've actually really enjoyed being with the young folks. It's been great. Mostly I've done fifth grade, 7th grade, 9th, 10th, 11th graders, and enjoyed all of them. They asked me when I was going to start if I had a preference for what age group, and I said, nope, I don't have any idea. I said, I will try them out and I'll let you know if I don't like some of them. And so far they've all been great. Now I have to admit, it is at some private schools here in town, so I'm a little selective on where I go, and those kids are awesome at those two schools that I'm working with. So don't plan to quit learning, don't plan to quit doing things until I just can't anymore.
Okay, so now that's a good segue in terms of teaching, substitute teaching and the younger generation. Is there anything that you would like to tell future generations in terms of advice or anything from your service that you think might be important down the road for them?
I think that, as I said, the military is an awesome opportunity for anybody. You can certainly go far, and the key is that you get out of it what you put in it. And if you want to be a success, and if you want to go far, you find a mentor, you take the hard assignments, you do the things. The joke was at work on my last work thing was, and they talk about it, the term Navy, they say, stands for never again volunteer yourself. And I would always tease them and say, oh yeah, I'm invoking the Navy. But they knew that I was someone who would say, yep, I'll try that. I'll give that a go. So that, I think, just being willing to step forward and say, yes, I will try that, I will learn that, is probably the most valuable advice. Whether you're going to college, whether you're going in the military, a job where you're learning and training, if you be proactive in doing what needs to be done. Employers will notice it. The military leadership would notice it. Leadership in any company or any entity will notice if you give that little extra. And when the time comes to promote somebody or to choose somebody for something important, they will look to you because they will know that you've been the person who stepped forward and done those types of things. So I say that's the best advice for any young person. That's what I tell my grandson all the time is give a little extra. Don't give just what's required, but give a little extra.
That sounds like very sound advice. Is there anything you would like to add that I did not ask you?
I guess I would like to say that I love this country. We have got an awesome, amazing country. And people thank us all the time for our service, and that is nice. It is wonderful to have that happen. But I would like to say that I appreciate the opportunity, although I didn't pick up a weapon and I didn't go fight for the country. It takes the people in the background, it takes their service as well. And I consider, even if it was a great job and it was great adventures, but the opportunity to serve this country was also something that I consider that it was a privilege for me to be able to do. I did not know that on the front end when I was only looking for a job and travel. But looking back, I consider that I had the opportunity to be a big part of the history of this country and to serve this country throughout my whole life. And so that I treasure. I'm very proud of that fact. Gonna go to the end of my days. I've got my uniform set aside, and that's what I want to be buried in. And that's, I'm that proud of it. That's how I want to go out of this world, is in my uniform with a flag on my coffin. And so I'm pleased that I have earned those two things. Like I said, I'm big on ceremonies, so take me out with a ceremony, play the bugle, and and let's go out that way.
Well, it does sound like you've almost you've been around with a lot of important events in terms of the USS Vulcan, one of the first women aboard a Navy vessel. You were there for the Operation Iraqi Freedom. You were there for Hurricane Katrina. You were there again for another deployment, and then even Guantanamo. So yeah, you've had your fair share of important events that have dotted all of history. So I want to thank you for your service, and more than just that, also just for what you've done and your family too. They count. You were away from them as well. So
yes.
All right. Very good. Well, thank you so much for sitting down with me today and telling me everything that you've done. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you, Patty.
Welcome. And you hit on a very good point. I will say just one last thing. The families are very important. The military children, they are amazing individuals. They're so resilient and so able to adapt to things. And the spouses, we were a dual spoused family, so we understood each other kind of like two policemen in a family would understand. But the spouses, they're beyond awesome what they do while the people go and serve the country. So can't say too much about them.
All right. Well, with that, we're going to finish up today. So thank you so much.
You're welcome.
All right.
My pleasure. It was good to get to know you too.